Elvis was driving across the Wolf River Bridge when he saw a man in tattered fatigues sitting beneath the concrete overpass. Something about the way the homeless veteran held his shoulders made Elvis slam on the brakes and pull over. When he walked closer and saw the man's face, Elvis broke down crying right there on the riverbank. It was Tommy Rodriguez, the soldier who had saved Elvis's life in Korea, and what Elvis did next didn't just save one veteran's life. It revolutionized how America treats its wounded warriors. It was March 15, 1969, and Elvis was returning from a recording session in Nashville when traffic forced him to take the back roads through Memphis. As he crossed the Wolf River Bridge, something caught his eye in the shadows beneath the overpass. At first, he thought it was just debris or construction equipment, but as his Cadillac slowed in the traffic, Elvis realized he was looking at a person. The man was sitting with his back against the concrete pillar, wrapped in what appeared to be an old military blanket. Elvis had seen homeless veterans before around Memphis. The sight always troubled him, but this time something was different. There was something familiar about the way this man sat, ramrod straight despite his obvious circumstances, shoulders back in a military posture that no amount of hardship could completely erase. Traffic started moving again, but Elvis couldn't shake what he'd seen. Instead of continuing home to Graceland, he pulled off at the next exit and doubled back. He parked his car on the shoulder and walked down the embankment toward the bridge supports. As he got closer, Elvis's heart began racing with a recognition he wasn't ready to accept. The man was older, weathered by time and hardship, but those eyes, those dark, intelligent eyes, were unmistakable. "Tommy?" Elvis called out softly. "Tommy Rodriguez?" The man looked up with a start, and Elvis knew immediately he was right. This was Sergeant Tommy Rodriguez, the man who had pulled Elvis out of a foxhole under enemy fire during the Korean War. The man who had carried Elvis on his back for 2 miles to a medic station when shrapnel had torn through Elvis's leg. The man who had been Elvis's closest friend during the darkest period of his life. But the Tommy Rodriguez sitting under this bridge was a shadow of the proud soldier Elvis remembered. His face was gaunt, his clothes were filthy, and his eyes held the distant, haunted look that Elvis had seen in too many veterans' faces since returning from Korea. "Elvis," Tommy whispered, his voice hoarse from disuse. "Elvis Presley? What are you doing here?" Elvis knelt down in the dirt beside his old friend, not caring about his expensive clothes or what he might look like to passing cars above. "Tommy, what happened? How long have you been living like this?" Tommy's laugh was bitter and broken. "Long enough to lose count. What does it matter?" To understand how deeply this moment affected Elvis, we need to go back to Korea, 1958. Elvis had been drafted at the height of his early fame, much to his manager Colonel Parker's dismay. He could have sought a deferment or requested assignment to special services to entertain troops, but Elvis insisted on serving as a regular soldier. He wanted to prove he wasn't just a pampered celebrity. He was assigned to the 32nd Armored Division and shipped to South Korea, where American forces were still dealing with the aftermath of the Korean War. It was dangerous, unglamorous work, patrolling disputed territories, dealing with infiltrators, and trying to maintain peace in a region still simmering with tension. Elvis was scared, lonely, and completely out of his element. The other soldiers were initially suspicious of the famous singer in their ranks. Some resented him, thinking he'd gotten special treatment. Others tried to befriend him for the wrong reasons. But not Tommy Rodriguez. Tommy was a 24-year-old sergeant from San Antonio, Texas, a career soldier who had already served 2 tours in Korea. He was tough, competent, and completely unimpressed by Elvis's celebrity status. When Elvis struggled with military protocols, Tommy helped him learn without making him feel stupid. When other soldiers gave Elvis grief, Tommy quietly made it clear that harassment wouldn't be tolerated. "You're just another grunt now, Presley," Tommy had told Elvis on his first day. "Fame don't stop bullets. You want to make it home alive, you better learn to be a soldier." Over the months they served together, Tommy became more than just Elvis's squad leader. He became his closest friend. They shared foxholes during long, cold nights. They talked about home, about their dreams, about what they'd do when their service was over. Elvis learned that Tommy had grown up dirt poor, the son of migrant workers who had never owned anything. The Army had given him purpose, structure, a chance to make something of himself. He planned to make it a career, maybe become an officer, send money home to his family. "After this tour, I'm thinking about applying for officer candidate school," Tommy told Elvis one night as they kept watch. "Maybe make something more of myself." Then came the night that changed everything. It was November the 12th, 1958. Elvis's unit was on patrol near the DMZ when North Korean infiltrators launched a surprise attack. In the chaos of gunfire and explosions, Elvis found himself pinned down in a foxhole as enemy soldiers advanced on their position. He was terrified, barely able to think clearly enough to return fire. Shrapnel from a grenade had torn through his left leg, and he was bleeding badly. The pain was excruciating, and he could feel himself getting dizzy from blood loss. That's when Tommy Rodriguez appeared out of the smoke and chaos. Despite the enemy fire still raining down around them, Tommy dropped into the foxhole beside Elvis. "You hit bad?" Tommy shouted over the gunfire. "My leg," Elvis gasped. "I can't move it." Tommy quickly assessed the wound, then made a decision that saved Elvis's life. He hoisted Elvis onto his back in a fireman's carry and began running toward the American lines, zigzagging through enemy fire. For 2 miles, Tommy carried Elvis through hostile territory. He was hit twice, once in the shoulder and once in the side, but he never stopped moving. He delivered Elvis to the medic station and then collapsed from his own wounds and exhaustion. Both men were hospitalized for weeks. Elvis recovered fully, but Tommy's injuries were more serious. The bullet that hit his shoulder had damaged nerves, leaving him with limited mobility in his right arm. His dreams of officer candidate school and a military career were over. "Don't worry about me," Tommy told Elvis as they recovered in the hospital. "Just promise me something." "Anything," Elvis replied. "When you get back to being famous, don't forget about the guys who don't make it home in one piece. Don't forget about the ones who come back different," Elvis promised, and he meant it. But as his career exploded after his discharge, as he was pulled into the whirlwind of movies and recordings and tours, the specific memory of Tommy's words faded into the background of his busy life. Now, 11 years later, Elvis was face to face with the living embodiment of that promise. "Tommy, tell me what happened," Elvis said, settling down beside his friend under the bridge. The story that emerged was heartbreakingly common among veterans of that era. Tommy had been discharged with a small disability pension, but no real support for transitioning back to civilian life. The nerve damage in his shoulder made physical labor difficult. His experiences in combat had left him with what doctors now recognize as PTSD, but in 1959, that condition barely had a name, let alone treatment. He'd tried to find work, but employers weren't interested in hiring a damaged veteran. He'd tried to reconnect with his family, but the war had changed him in ways they couldn't understand. He'd started drinking to quiet the nightmares, and the drinking had cost him the few jobs he'd managed to find. "I kept thinking about that night you got hit," Tommy said, staring out at the muddy water of the Wolf River. "I can still hear those mortars falling. I can still smell the smoke. Sometimes I wake up and think I'm still there." Elvis listened with growing horror and shame. While he had been living in luxury at Graceland, his friend, the man who had saved his life, had been fighting a different kind of war, one that society seemed determined to let him lose. "Tommy, why didn't you contact me? I would have helped. You know I would have helped." Tommy's smile was sad, but not bitter. "What was I going to do, show up at Graceland and say, 'Hey, remember me. I'm the guy who carried you out of that foxhole. Can you spare some change?' You had your life, Elvis. I didn't want to be a burden." That last word, burden, hit Elvis like a physical blow. The man who had literally carried him to safety, who had sacrificed his own dreams and health to save Elvis's life, thought of himself as a potential burden. The injustice of it was overwhelming. "Tommy," Elvis said, "you're coming home with me." Tommy shook his head. "I appreciate the gesture, Elvis, but I'm not a charity case." "It's not charity," Elvis replied. "It's a debt. One I should have paid a long time ago." It took 3 hours of patient conversation, but eventually Tommy agreed to let Elvis help him. That night, Tommy Rodriguez checked into the best hotel in Memphis, took his first hot shower in months, and slept in a real bed for the first time in years. But Elvis knew that clean clothes and a hotel room weren't going to solve Tommy's real problems. The next morning, Elvis began making phone calls. He contacted the Veterans Administration, only to be told that Tommy's case was not unusual and that there were limited resources for veterans with his particular combination of problems. He called private hospitals and treatment centers, but most of them had no experience dealing with combat trauma or the complex issues facing homeless veterans. Frustrated by the system's inability to help, Elvis made a decision that would change the landscape of veteran care in America. He decided to create his own solution. Using his own money, Elvis purchased a 40-acre property outside Memphis and began converting it into a comprehensive treatment facility for veterans struggling with combat trauma, addiction, and homelessness. He hired the best doctors and therapists he could find, many of them veterans themselves who understood the unique challenges their patients faced. The Tommy Rodriguez Treatment Center opened its doors in January 1970, with Tommy as its first resident. The facility offered not just medical care and addiction treatment, but also job training, education programs, and long-term housing assistance. Elvis's approach was revolutionary for its time. Instead of treating veterans as broken people who needed to be fixed, the center treated them as heroes who had sacrificed for their country and deserved comprehensive support in rebuilding their lives. Tommy thrived in the environment. The nightmares didn't disappear overnight, but with proper treatment and medication, they became manageable. The drinking stopped. His physical therapy helped restore some function to his damaged shoulder. More importantly, Tommy found purpose again. He became a counselor at the center, helping other veterans navigate the difficult transition from military to civilian life. His experience and natural leadership abilities made him invaluable to the program. But Elvis wasn't satisfied with helping just one veteran at a time. He began lobbying Congress for better funding for veteran services. He testified before congressional committees about the inadequacies of the VA system. He used his celebrity platform to raise awareness about the struggles facing combat veterans. "We send these men to fight for our country," Elvis said in a 1971 interview, "and then we abandon them when they come home wounded. That's not just wrong, it's immoral." Elvis's advocacy work led to the Veterans Mental Health Act of 1974, which dramatically increased funding for PTSD treatment and veteran support services. He also helped establish similar treatment centers in 5 other states, all modeled on the Tommy Rodriguez facility. By 1975, the Tommy Rodriguez Treatment Center had helped over 500 veterans rebuild their lives. The success rate was unprecedented. Over 80% of program graduates were able to maintain stable housing and employment for at least 2 years after treatment. Tommy Rodriguez became the center's director in 1973 and served in that role until his retirement in 1995. Under his leadership, the facility became a model for veteran care nationwide. If you enjoyed this story of brotherhood and second chances, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories about the power of loyalty and compassion. Hit that thumbs up button if this story moved you, and share it with someone who needs to hear about the importance of never forgetting those who served. "You know what I learned from Tommy?" Elvis said in his final interview about the center. "I learned that saving someone's life isn't something you do once and forget about. It's a responsibility that lasts forever. Tommy saved my life in Korea, but he also saved my soul by showing me what real service looks like." When Elvis died in August 1977, Tommy Rodriguez was one of the pallbearers at his funeral. In his eulogy, Tommy said, "People remember Elvis for his music, for his movies, for his fame, but I'll remember him for something more important. I'll remember him as the man who kept a promise. When I was broken and forgotten under a bridge, Elvis didn't see a burden or a charity case. He saw a brother who needed help. That's the Elvis the world should remember." Today, the Tommy Rodriguez Treatment Center continues to serve veterans across the Mid-South. Over its 50-year history, it has helped more than 15,000 veterans transition successfully back to civilian life. The center's approach has been replicated at dozens of facilities across the country, and its methods are now considered standard practice in veteran care. There's a bronze plaque at the entrance to the center that reads, "In memory of Elvis Presley, who understood that heroism isn't just about saving lives in combat, it's about saving lives every day, one person at a time." The story of Elvis and Tommy Rodriguez reminds us that the bonds forged in extreme circumstances don't disappear when the crisis ends. True friendship means being there for each other, not just in moments of immediate danger, but in the long, difficult aftermath when the real healing has to begin. Sometimes the most important battles are fought not with weapons, but with compassion, resources, and an unwavering commitment to leaving no one behind. Have you ever had someone save your life, literally or figuratively? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to ring that notification bell for more amazing true stories about friendship, loyalty, and the power of keeping promises.